They are the most iconic of all warriors. The elite fighting force of the Middle Ages. A powerful, efficient, and deadly killing machine that struck fear in the hearts of their enemies.
The English Knights.
Knights!
Now, I'm going to unlock their code of chivalry, see how it influenced their fighting, and learn how one man, Henry V, dared to break that code.
It was here, on this newly plowed wheat field in northern France, that Henry would take on the finest military officers France had to offer. And it was here, at the Battle of Agincourt, that many say chivalry died.
My name is Terry Shepard. I'm a Green Beret sent on combat and training missions around the world. But I'm part of a long line of elite warriors tested in battle. And the only way to reveal their weapons and tactics is to experience them myself. I'm about to find out what it takes to be a medieval warrior. England, the golden age of chivalry. A time of honor, duty, loyalty, and bravery. It determined how you lived and how you fought. Training to become an English knight started at the age of 5, when young nobles became squires of the court. By age 10, they already had a sword in their hand and were being trained to kill with the chosen weapon of the knight.
Hey! 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 I'm here with Dave, a real-life expert on medieval sword fighting. And what he's doing is really showing me the misconceptions people today have about how these English knights fought with these long swords. Now, we're using these plastic ones here. And back then, the knights, as young guys, as squires, would have used wooden ones for a few reasons. One, wood's more durable, and you won't be chewing up a metal blade with constantly training. And second of all, and more important, especially in my case, is that these plastic swords have a lot less chance of hurting you, and certainly are not going to kill you. So, Dave, talk to me a little bit about what are some of the things you just did to me. I tried to attack you, and it totally didn't work. What happened there?
The first thing that everybody has a conception of with swordsmanship, particularly European swordsmanship, is that the blades are very, very heavy, very hard to control.
Right.
Everything is a tool. It's designed to work to a particular purpose. This makes us carry out little mistakes that we see in common combat forms. For example, if we're an uneducated fighter, the first thing I'll do is, if I want to come and punch you, is I'll pull my arm back.
Yeah.
And obviously,
And I'm gonna jam.
if you're experienced, you'll
I'm gonna
jam
come
it,
right at
you'll
you,
take
right,
it straight away.
right.
Recognizing the distance that you attack your opponent is very, very important. If I fight in an uneducated manner, the initial attack will be something along the nature of this, that I'll step in.
And I'm gonna come in right in there.
Immediately, my body's entered into the distance of your blade, so immediately you can kill me.
Hey!
The length of your weapon maintains distance and keeps your opponent at bay.
Hey!
Control that distance, and you control the kill zone.
You have to watch that your hands become a target.
By the way, no, it's great, man. That's another surprise attack. The last thing you think is when you're going with that your hands are vulnerable. They're vulnerable, believe me. And you didn't unload on me on there. Okay.
Again, the principle is very much, if a target reaches you that isn't the steel, you can kill that target. Because again, if you start off your strike earlier in, here, we should both be killing each other.
Right.
Okay?
Right!
There, straight at you.
And by the way, that's really fast. You almost don't see it coming. All right.
And to me, what's most important to remember about hand-to-hand combat is the speed.
Hey!
As your opponent attacks, you have less than a half second to counter. Most hand-to-hand battles last less than 10 seconds. And the only rule, there are no rules.
Man, that was awesome. The take-home message here is this. Not only can Dave use that sword as a really deadly and fast weapon, he's using his whole body as a weapon. This is fast, it's aggressive, and this is the stuff that the English knights would use to dominate and kill their opponents on the battlefield. Hey, Dave, thanks, man. Thanks for not killing me.
Pleasure.
By their teens, young knights were expert killers with weapons like the sword. But even after their formal training, they continued to hone their skills in organized fights.
During the Middle Ages, knights would hold tournaments. The goal, to test their skills, but really, to prepare them for combat.
They were killing machines. They were trained to do a job, which was war. And when there was no war and when it was quiet, then they had to be entertained.
There were two basic competitions at these tournaments: melees, which simulated hand-to-hand combat, and the most popular event, the joust.
Okay.
The idea was to hit pieces of armour. If you could hit the body, you got so many points. If you could hit the head, you got more points. And if you could unhorse the rider, then you scored maximum points.
Scoring points was important, because if defeated, you lost what was most valuable: your horse, your armor, your weapons. And if you were struck in the gut, in the neck, or the face, you could lose your life. This is 2,000 pounds thundering at 30 miles an hour, wielding the deadliest weapon of the Middle Ages, the lance. The word lance is a derivative of lancia, a javelin used by the Romans. Basically a long spear, the lance averages 12 feet in length. Usually made of ash, it is tipped with a steel or iron head. During a joust, a knight uses it to deliver a devastating blow equaling 7 tons of force. The lance may be a simple weapon, but to master its use on horseback takes years and years of practice.
This is the quintain, used by the knight to hone his skill with a lance. Perfect.
Quintain is a small wooden target attached to a rotating pole. In these tournaments, the quintain is the highest test for an English knight, because on the battlefield, speed and accuracy are a knight's most important skills. At a full gallop, the most skilled knight can pick up an apple at the end of his lance.
So these tournaments were in essence war games. The same skills used to earn points in a tournament prepared you to kill a man in battle. The English knights needed to be in a constant state of vigilance because England was in a constant state of war.
15th century AD, England and France are embroiled in the 100 Years' War. At stake, nearly half of France. At the center of this dispute is Aquitaine, the Bordeaux region of modern-day France. At the beginning of the war, this is actually English territory, but the French crown decides to seize Aquitaine. In retaliation, England invades. The English win early decisive battles at Crécy and Poitiers. The French counter by sacking the English town of Winchelsea. This war is fought mostly by noble knights, and for hundreds of years, these knights have fought under a code that all nobles were expected to follow: the code of chivalry.
Perhaps the most important part of becoming a knight would be the solemn vow of chivalry: justice, loyalty, faith, humility. It is this noble set of ideals that separates knights from all other warriors throughout time.
Chivalry originated among the knights of the First Crusades, holy warriors who pledged to protect the weak, defenseless, and helpless. The rules are strictly followed. Knights would only engage other knights. Raising the sword or gauntlet is the signal for surrender. Captured knights were then to be ransomed and returned to their homeland, not killed.
Chivalry was really important for the warrior elite in what we now call the Middle Ages. And it's not just about warfare, it's about culture, it's about your religion.
It's a philosophy, really, of
Yeah,
living,
exactly,
isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a philosophy of life, chivalry is. But when it comes to the sharp end, it's also a kind of martial arts creed. It's a way of learning about war, about leading in war.
At the beginning of the 100 Years' War, battles were fought under the strict rules of chivalry. But as the war continues on for decades, the battles become more and more brutal. On the front lines of these wars are the knights.
Most people think of knights as fighting on horseback. More often than not, these battles were fought on foot in the trenches.
It was hand-to-hand combat, and it involved some very vicious weapons.
So I'm talking to Edward, who's an expert on medieval weapons. Now, Edward, I see a bunch of stuff here. It looks kind of scary. What do we got?
Well, it's a range of weapons. A lot of them are cheap and cheerful.
That looks like the most wicked one. What is that?
This is the war hammer.
That just sounds scary.
You've got hammer this end. You can stab with this end.
Right.
And this is called a pelican beak. And that's very good for getting through armor, not just for hooking, but we've seen skulls from people that were killed at this time, and the holes in the heads completely matched.
Punched right through
Yeah,
there.
right through a helmet.
So you can feel, wow, that feels great actually, because you feel the weight, and if this just gets going, it spikes,
Yeah.
you can spike. Now, if you hit someone with this on the armor, it would dent in,
Yeah.
and it would probably make it harder to breathe, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Or on the head, you just get complete concussive wounds.
Just bang on the thing. That's a pretty
go
versatile
through.
weapon right there.
These weapons were deadly on the battlefield, but many of them started as simple tools.
Flails. Now this is used for threshing wheat,
Right, yep.
but people would know you could hurt someone with these. Don't need any skill. You could just swing it, you can hook weapons, pull them out. Very straightforward.
But again, though, you got to kind of time it, and because once it starts moving, you got to sort of stay with it.
That's it, there's momentum with it.
It's a momentum
particularly
weapon.
With the end. Now this is similar, and this is an agricultural implement. It's called a bill hook. And you'd use this for pruning trees. Peasants would be very familiar with these. Everyone would see either handheld or long versions. But in the hands of a fighter, you could pull a man off a horse with
Hook
this,
anywhere on
drag
there.
someone out of the line, finish him off with the end. Very nasty.
That's pretty wicked.
These weapons were traditionally viewed as commoner or peasant weapons, but as the 100 Years' War raged on, more and more nobles adopted them.
All right, so here we go. And you've got this log pole arm, and again, I'm coming over the top. I miss, done. Could you also hook with that thing too?
You can.
Open me up.
Also, it's good for hooking bits of the body. You've got leg armor like that, it's exposed at the back.
Right, so if I had armor, you could even hook like right here.
Just pull you
That's
forward.
vicious. And then stay right there. That was really close. So what you saw right there is a guy like him who knows how to do this and with good body mechanics, opened me up, took me down, and killed me right there. Now, were these weapons, all of these weapons, were these kind of considered chivalric weapons?
It's not the romantic ideal, but they were the weapons of the day that came to hand, and whatever you needed in a fight, you'd use. And then you could do the poetry later.
These kind of weapons and this kind of fighting was becoming really important to the English. They had a new king, a warrior who was going to make this kind of fighting central to the English strategy.
1413, a new leader is crowned, one many consider to be the greatest king in the history of England.
The fate of England is in the hands of the newly crowned king, Henry V. His grandfather, Edward III, started the war. Henry intends to finish it.
Henry becomes king at age 26. He's been raised in the court under the strict code of chivalry. But to defeat France, Henry plans to break that code and fight his own way. August 1415. Henry and his men board a fleet of 1,500 ships and sail across the English Channel. His destination, the coast of France. His goal, to win the French crown.
Before he's through, he'll change England and the very nature of warfare forever.
I'm on a journey into the warrior culture of the English knights. I've seen how they train. I've experienced some of their fighting techniques. But in medieval England, there was one weapon that all young warriors had to master: the sword.
The English knight, icon in the West of what it means to be a warrior. And this is the icon of what it means to be a knight. Edward, what kind of sword is that you're fighting me with?
Well, it's called a hand and a half.
The hand-and-a-half sword's strength is its versatility. At 4 feet long, it provides the warrior with more power than shorter swords, but is light enough to be used as a single-handed weapon. Made from hardened steel, the blade is double-edged, allowing for hacking and slashing. It's also tipped for stabbing and thrusting, and running down the middle is a fuller, sometimes referred to as a blood groove. This half-inch wide channel reduces the blade's mass, making it lighter, but it also reinforces the edges. This was an almost perfect weapon.
What kind of damage could this thing do to somebody?
It's devastating. Weapon of choice, really. If you could afford this, you could use this. It could cut a man from shoulder down to hip with one big sweep. It could go through a skull very easily. We know that it can go through helmet, skull, and then the teeth themselves can stop it traveling further through the head.
That's kind of a grim idea if you think about it. A sword going through the helmet, going through the head, and only being stopped by the teeth. Medieval fighting, that's the way these guys were.
They're also quite well balanced. You've got the pommel here, counterbalancing the blade. got a balancing point about here where my hand is.
So these things are actually surprisingly well balanced, the way that you
Oh,
fall
yeah,
with
a lot
them
of
too.
thought's gone into these.
I mean, I think a lot of people thought, oh, this is a big hacking, slashing. It is, but there's a lot of finesse to this.
Yeah, and that's what part of the training of a young noble would be about.
The young nobles started learning those skills at age 5 or 6, but before they were taught to use the sword, they learned to respect what it represented.
This was very much tied into like a whole ethos, a whole way of thinking, like a, you know what I mean?
It's iconographical. You see it all the time in paintings, any way that you want to say,
I mean,
he's a knight, he's a nobleman, possibly he's a holy warrior.
Were commoners and peasants, were they even allowed to use these?
No, it'd be unlikely. If they got hold of them, the chances are they took it off a dead person.
Like chivalry, the sword itself fused Christian and military principles. Where the handle meets the blade is the cross of the sword, a constant reminder of the knight's duty as a holy warrior.
So what we're talking about here is a weapon that had a whole philosophy on how to use it. In addition to like all the actual physical skill sets, there was a philosophy, a way of thinking and a way of living, all based around the sword. This is what made the knights so different than any other warrior society.
By their late teens, young knights in training were expected to master weapons like the hand and a half, as well as live by the codes of chivalry. If the young noble was deemed worthy to become a warrior, he was knighted. His vow, to defend his king and uphold the code of chivalry. He knelt before his king or lord and was dubbed with a sword. This was the last blow the knight would ever receive without returning it. But at the dawn of the 15th century, England's new warrior king, Henry V, is about to change the code of the English knight. If the sword symbolized chivalry,
Look your arrows.
then a new weapon would signal its demise.
Mark. Loose.
This, and specifically these men, are Henry's secret weapon. They're armed with the medieval version of an automatic rifle, the longbow.
The longbow was not considered a noble weapon, but Henry V had personally experienced the longbow's power. At the age of 16, during one of his first battles, Henry took a longbow arrow to the face. He pulled the arrow out and kept fighting, but was so impressed with the weapon's range and power that when he became king, he made the longbow the centerpiece of his French campaign.
So Martin, why was the longbow so prolific in England?
Well, the kings of England needed archers, so from the age of about 7 years old, they had to train every Sunday.
So this was required training for everybody in the country at the
By
time.
law.
What was it like that in France?
No. The French thought there was beneath them. They were the people that thought everything was done under the codes of chivalry.
August 1415.
1,500 English ships carrying 10,000 men and King Henry himself land in northern France. Henry's goal, march into Paris and claim the throne.
Henry plans to take the countryside by force and prove to the French people that their own king is incapable of protecting them. Henry's first target, the port town of Harfleur. Here, he will unveil a new way to wage war. I've experienced the traditions and weapons of chivalry and the new tactics of Henry V. Merging these tactics will now define the English knight. But there was another iconic element that made the knights the most feared warriors of their time. The suit of armor. Plate armor made the knight an offensive weapon. Forged of thick steel, the breastplate and back armor provide protection against blows to the midsection. The leg and arm coverings are sectioned to allow for movement during battle. Gauntlets, basically armored gloves, protect the hands. The helmet is usually conical to deflect blows to the head, and a detachable visor protects the eyes and face, while mail attached to the back protects the neck.
So So I'm wearing a full suit of plate armor, and I'm smiling because ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to have this on and feel what it feels like. And I gotta tell you, I feel like a nightmare walking. This is like 80 pounds of metal, but it's about what we carry in the infantry right now, 80 pounds, 100 pounds. But it's really surprisingly well designed. It flows well, I can walk. I hear myself walking, which is kind of a little distracting. I guess I'd have to get used to that. I can get down, I can look around, I can get back up. I could definitely run if I had to, and I feel like I could get on a horse. And I could also draw a sword and fight, which was key. So advantages, an absolute feeling of invulnerability. I know that if I get hit with a sword, I'm gonna be okay for that. Disadvantages, this is heavy. This is gonna slow down my movement. I can do everything, but it's gonna be slower. The other thing is too, this is gonna be really hot. I'm gonna lose a lot of water. And the final thing is, this is a lot of weight.
So plate armor was the knight's best form of protection. But at the Battle of Agincourt, the French were also protected by suits of armor. And it will play a major role in the French defeat. September 1415. After a brutal 5-week siege of Harfleur, the English army is finally victorious. But Henry's men are now exhausted and racked with disease, so they retreat to the English stronghold of Calais. But retreat is not that easy. The French crown, sensing English weakness and hungry for revenge, sends an army of elite knights after Henry. The English have gone from hunters to the hunted.
Henry V, one of the knight's own, knew that chivalry alone could not defeat the French. The King of England was about to change the rules.
The English knight, the most feared killing machine of the Middle Ages. I've seen how they're training, and their weapons define their code of chivalry.
But in France, 1415, King Henry would throw the rules of chivalry out the window. The future of England would not be determined by the point of a sword, but on the draw of a longbow.
The best longbows come from the yew tree. Flexible sapwood outside, combined with thick, strong heartwood inside, gives the bow immense strength and elasticity. Range, 200 to 400 yards. Speed, nearly 200 miles per hour.
I'm with Steve, one of the best bowmen in the world. We're gonna get to watch how a pro sends one of these down range. Yeah! Wow! That got some serious arc on it.
And it's that arc that's key to the longbow's effectiveness. When shot parallel to the ground at 0 degrees, the arrow travels at 180 miles per hour and has a range of less than 100 yards. But when shot at a 45-degree angle, upward momentum gives the arrow a range of 300 yards. The arrow travels at 180 miles per hour when leaving the bow. It slows at the height of its flight path, but as it descends, it begins to gain velocity. At impact, it hits its target at a speed of up to 100 miles per hour.
Wow. I mean, you should see that thing sailing. It is gone. And the coolest thing when I was watching him is if you saw this, the whole thing, from the moment he knocks it, it's basically one fluid movement where he's moving through it and then he goes. Man, what hang time, bro. Now, I'm gonna get to do something I've always wanted to do. Shoot a longbow.
You would think firing a bow would be easy, but I can tell you, just pulling back the string is really hard, and I'm using a smaller, simpler training bow.
That's pretty good.
It really is a lot harder than it looks. And I know Steve was being nice, and he gave me basically what would be used by a 12-year-old boy back in the day. So Steve, let me watch you do this again, man.
Okay. Well, this bow's more of a man's bow.
He had to get that in, didn't he?
Steve's bow has a draw weight of 130 pounds.
Wow.
That's the amount of weight he will draw when pulling the bow. Today, the average man can pull the draw weight of 60 pounds. But during Henry's day, the strongest longbowman could pull a draw weight of over 180 pounds.
That was great, man. The interesting part about this was that Again, I'm not strong. I'm not a weak guy, but you know, to pull a bow like this, it would take years of developing those tendons and muscles to be able to come back and do that.
Absolutely. You've got tendon strength here, first of all, you've got to build. You've then got to build the muscle structure under here. And to be honest, the weight is all taken on your back and your shoulders, and your back and your shoulders are far stronger than your arms will ever be.
These guys were doing this since they were 6 years old. So by the time they were ready to fight with this, they were deadly accurate. So this really shows that warriors take years to develop their skills. Years of training, years of practice. Oi! His went a whole lot farther than mine. That was great, man. So we've seen the longbow's range, but now we're gonna check out the longbow's destructive power. Let's find out what happens when arrow meets bone. All right, guys, let's do it. Nice. Went right through that thick ox bone. Ox bone is a lot thicker than human bone. I can imagine what that would do to a guy at the under end of that. Devastating. Nice.
These arrows are traveling at 180 miles per hour, and it's said that on the battlefield, they could actually go straight through a man.
Nice. Good job, guys. So we've seen the destructive power of the English longbow, but the French had a weapon that was just as deadly, the crossbow. It fires a bolt, not an arrow. It has greater range than the average longbow, and it takes a lot less training to get good at. The crossbow did have one major disadvantage: the time it takes to load and fire. So I've got a longbow and a crossbow. I want to see how many arrows can get off in the time it takes to load and shoot the crossbow. You guys ready to go? All right, on my mark, get set, go.
Henry was so convinced of the longbow's power that as he prepared for his invasion of France, he stockpiled arrows in the Tower of London, over 100,000 of them in all. And because the fletching on the arrows was made of goose feathers, he decimated England's goose population. For years, you couldn't even find a goose within 30 miles of London.
Seven to 1. The rate of fire is 7 arrows to 1 crossbow bolt. That's 7 times the number of dead Frenchmen. If I'm Henry V, I really like those odds.
So Henry felt the longbowman gave him a tactical advantage over the French. And he'll need it, because he is about to face the fight of his life. October 1415. More than 30,000 French knights and men-at-arms marched northward. Their goal, wipe Henry and his English army off the face of the earth. Henry hopes to make it to Calais and across the English Channel to safety.
But in a small town named Agincourt, the road to Calais is blocked by thousands of French knights. Henry and his men are surrounded and outnumbered. If he were to have any chance to survive, it would be through battlefield tactics.
In history, some battles are turning points. Battles which forever change a warrior culture and the very nature of warfare itself. For King Henry V and his English knights, such a battle happened here on a freshly plowed field just outside a French village called Agincourt.
Outnumbered at least 3 to 1, Henry has only one choice: to fight. Henry is staking everything, his reputation, maybe even the future of England, not on the chivalry of his knights, but on the skill of his archers.
That's because Henry's strategy is completely different from any other military leader of his time. Instead of mounted knights, Henry has invaded France with an army made up almost exclusively of archers. These are not nobles, but commoners deadly with a longbow. Waiting for him at Agincourt, France has assembled its most elite warriors, including 10,000 mounted knights, 6,000 men-at-arms, 4,000 crossbowmen.
So the question for Henry is, how do you defeat an army of knights with archers? Step 1, staves.
The stave is just a simple wooden post, but Henry orders all his archers to carry these staves into battle, because these simple posts will become their first line of defense. 6 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, the staves are sharpened at both ends. Before battle, the archers pound the staves into the ground at a 45-degree angle, spaced 3 to 4 feet apart. Each archer would then stand between 2 of the staves. The result? A deadly wall of spikes that protected English archers from charging French knights.
Once the horses see this, they either want to jump or pull back.
Right.
But if they run on, you can imagine a horse, 2 ton,
Oh, wow.
going this way, 30 miles an hour, hitting this. It goes into their chest, impales them, stops the horse, knight off, over the top, horse dead, knight
Knight
dead.
dead, that's the end of it. A simple and effective way for these guys to take away a lot of the power of the knights that they were about to face.
The stave was Henry's very low-tech solution to protect his archers. But to defeat the French knights at Agincourt, Henry also relied on new technology.
By the time of Agincourt, the English had developed a new kind of arrowhead, one that would change the way war would be fought.
In the early years of the Middle Ages, arrows were virtually useless against plate armor. But by the 13th century, the English developed a new style of arrowhead, the bodkin. What makes the bodkin so effective is its shape, essentially a square metal spike. Upon impact, all of the speed and power of the arrow is transferred into the bodkin's tip, allowing it to effectively penetrate plate armor.
We've seen what this weapon can do to an ox bone. Let's check out what it does to plate armor. Oh, popped right through.
These armor-piercing arrows instantly made the English longbowmen more deadly, because now they could wound a fully armored knight at 250 yards and kill at 100 yards.
That was a great shot right there. He put that right on top of the other one. So you can imagine the French troops coming at these archers, kind of mired down in the mud, and these arrows just flying right into them, penetrating their armor. Done.
These technological advancements in arrows made the longbow an even more powerful weapon, but it also made it more versatile.
Archers knew that to shoot at 45 degrees gave them the best angle and apex to drop their arrows on top of their enemies.
But these new armor-piercing arrowheads allowed archers to lower their angle of fire.
That as the French got closer, the English were actually able to shoot their arrows straight at the French. An arrow moving straight at you has a much greater chance of punching through your armor and injuring or killing you.
But what if the French knights were able to reach the English front lines? How would an archer attack a knight in armor? With hand-to-hand combat. Step 1, knock him off his horse.
When a knight was unhorsed, he lost 70 to 80% of his combat effectiveness. But once on the ground, he still had to be dealt with. Edward's gonna show us how these guys did this. So what's the first thing you guys are doing here?
We're split up, Terry. We're using our numbers. I'm keeping him distracted.
Right.
I'm not trying to kill him. I'm just trying to keep you busy. Then I grab him.
And all these guys swarm him right now. And once he's on his back, he's like a turtle. It's really hard for him to move. Now what happens right now?
Open him up, find his weak points, his face, his groin. Also, the armpits. The most you can have is chainmail protecting you there.
Right.
Otherwise,
And that
it's
big
brutal.
axillary artery,
Yeah.
just cut that open.
It's brutal and it's bloody, but it's effective.
So we're not talking about like any rules here. This is basically just butchery. You got the guy in the
Absolutely.
ground and you're just finishing him off as fast as you can.
Can't even fight back. We just want to end it and kill him.
Make no mistake, this was not how the French knights were expecting to fight. By the code of chivalry, knights were supposed to fight knights, and these noble knights were supposed to be captured, not killed.
This is anything but chivalric. What you see here is a brutal, swarming way to kill a knight. And if Henry and his men were to have any chance against the French, these were the tactics they would have to use. So Henry's tactics have become those of an army that's trapped. Gone is the code of chivalry and the knightly way of fighting. Henry knew this was no game, no tournament. He's cornered and desperate. His army is hopelessly outnumbered, and fighting for its very existence.
Henry may be outnumbered, but the battlefield at Agincourt plays to his advantage. He places his troops on a narrow piece of land between the two towns of Tramcourt and Agincourt. In between is freshly plowed farmland bordered by dense forests. By choosing this piece of land, Henry knows he can't be outflanked. The French will have no choice but to come directly at the English forces. Henry's men camp out, ready to do battle the next day. As the sun sets, a steady rain begins to fall, and the English soldiers' thoughts turn inward.
The night before the battle at Agincourt was miserable for the English. They'd been marching and fighting across 238 miles. There was a driving rain, they were soaking wet, they were hungry, depleted, and most of them were racked with dysentery. On the French side, they could actually see the faces in the firelight celebrating, laughing, joking, drinking, cooking meat, fixing their armor, and to add insult to injury, betting on who they would kill and capture the next day. Back on the English side, probably the only thing you could hear would be the priests hearing confessions from men who were certain they were gonna die.
October 25th, 1415, the day of the battle. The English longbowmen rise, knowing that the rules of chivalry don't apply to them. An encounter with a French knight will mean one thing: certain slaughter.
The bitter disputes of the 100 Years' War are about to be settled on a soggy wheat field in northern France. Henry will defy military logic with one more bold and surprising tactic.
History's greatest warriors all have a defining moment. For England's Henry V, that moment happened at Agincourt.
It was here, on this newly plowed wheat field in northern France, that Henry would take on the finest military officers France had to offer. And it was here, at the Battle of Agincourt, that many say chivalry died.
October 25th, 1415. The French army has trapped Henry and the English just outside Agincourt, France. The French are well provisioned and well rested. They have over 20,000 knights, nobles, and men-at-arms, enough for 3 thick battle lines, with cavalry and archers on the flanks. Across the rain-soaked wheat field, it's a totally different story. The English only have 5,000 archers and 1,000 knights on foot, barely enough to form one thin line. But in the center, Henry V, long called the Warrior King, takes up position.
So Mike, it's the morning of the battle. This is it for them. How was Henry able to kind of hold that together?
Henry's instinctive skill was we can pull us into something extraordinary. So he puts on his battle crown. Everyone watches it.
What a sight, man. I mean, I keep thinking of this image over and over again about Henry V. I mean, really, it's a moving idea that this king would put on a helmet with a crown welded to it and going, I'm going to be right in the middle of this with you guys. I mean,
I'm going to be in the center of the line. I'll make myself a target.
Right, willingly.
We are in this together. We win this together, or we die together.
Motivated by the bravery of their leader, the English archers place their staves and prepare for the French to attack. The French are in no hurry.
The French and English have been staring at each other for hours. Cat and mouse, who moves first? Henry decides, unthinkably, to move his archers forward. They pick up their stakes, gather their bravery, and advance into the teeth of the enemy, thinking at any moment they could get shot at or trampled. Unbelievably, the French do nothing. The archers reset their stakes, look right at the French, who are now within bowshot range, and take aim.
Henry's archers are now just 150 yards from the French, well within longbow range.
Thousands of English arrows literally blot out the sun and punch into the French line. This galvanizes them. Their anger and determination to kill every Englishman is right there at the point of the sword, and they draw.
The French cavalry charges. Thousands of armored knights on horseback race directly towards the English archers. But they quickly hit something they weren't expecting: the muddy battlefield.
And they quickly realize that the heavy horses, the armor, and the weapons designed to kill people in battle are working against them. They can't move in the mud. They're slogging forward very slowly. They become sitting ducks for the English archers.
8,000 French knights continue to slog slowly across the battlefield. Most die in a hail of English arrows, but some manage to make it across the battlefield and to the English front lines.
And then the unthinkable happens. Archers, known for running at the sight of hand-to-hand combat, put down their bows, pick up hand-to-hand weapons, and viciously attack the French. They swarm them like bees. This is a street fight for survival. There is no chivalry here.
They're literally going at it, hammer and tongs. They are whacking these aristocrats with hammers, with everything. And the French dead are piled up 10 high.
Wave after wave of French knights attack, but the English line, anchored by the archers, refuses to break.
Across the line in the English, Henry V was fighting and leading front and center.
To give you an idea of the intensity of the fighting, the king's own brother is knocked to the ground wounded. The jubilant French are hauling him out along the mud, and the king steps forward and puts his foot on his brother's torso and fights on his body. You're not taking my brother.
What an image, man. What an image, and what an idea of who this guy was, who this king was. This wasn't just a king. This was a real...
brother in arms.
Yeah, he was special. I can imagine what it would feel like to look to my left and see my king with his broken crown, fighting and risking his life alongside mine. The French had no chance.
Against all odds, Henry has led the English to an astounding victory. And the key to that victory is the common archer.
A lot of people, when they talk about Agincourt, they talk about the death of chivalry.
It was the death of one kind of chivalry, the elitist chivalry. A different kind of chivalry was born in its place, where Henry V had this extraordinary vision that everyone was special. It's the most extraordinary moment in the Middle Ages.
Unbelievable. And I think that also just really, for me anyway, that holds a lot of personal meaning and value, because you are talking about a commander who's gone through everything with you. You're willing to fight and die for them, and instead of being cannon fodder or forgotten about when it's all over, you matter. And that must have meant so much to those guys.
It is the ultimate band of brothers. And it's medieval, but it's also absolutely timeless.
200 Englishmen were killed that day, but at Agincourt, the French lost over 10,000 men. They're all buried here, under a simple monument next to the battlefield. For me, it's important to also honor the French. They died defending their king and their country. And in my mind, all the men on this battlefield were warriors. Henry continued his quest for the crown of France, but 7 years after Agincourt, he died of dysentery. He never set foot in Paris. The 100 Years' War raged on for another 30 years. France is never brought under English control, but Henry's victory at Agincourt becomes a defining moment for England. And his feats at Agincourt are considered so heroic, they're immortalized by Shakespeare in one of his most famous plays ever.
We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Shakespeare imagined Henry V saying this, and it's not important if he didn't. What really matters is Henry's legacy, and the legacy of an army that snatched victory from the jaws of certain death. Agincourt proved that a combat leader who understood, really cared about, and fought right alongside his troops could achieve the impossible. It's rightly said that Henry V is one of England's greatest kings. But more importantly for me, he was a warrior.